What's up, gang? Thanks for joining the Undiplomatic Podcast, the show with undiplomatic takes about the foreign policy scene. I'm your host, Van Jackson. And I should say we have Matt and Julia scheduled, hopefully, for doing a variety show together next week. I miss my co-hosts, and the scheduling has just been really tough. This has been a busy time of year for me, and the time difference right now between like New Zealand and the East Coast and the US is fucking bananas. We'll get that real soon. Two other pieces of news, or three new pieces of news before we get into the show proper. One, Katrina vanden Heuvel, publisher of The Nation magazine, who I've been seeing on the Sunday shows for like decades. She's actually going to be a guest on the podcast. So that'll be dropping very soon, maybe in the next few days, but by next week at the latest. Second piece of news, the YouTube channel has ways to support us now. So basically, if you want to support the podcast specifically, there are ways to do that on YouTube now through memberships. I think there's some kind of tipping mechanism. It's all there, but that's available now. And of course, I would appreciate it since the podcast costs me money. The newsletter makes me money. The podcast costs me money. Okay. The other piece of news before we get to the news, the other show that I host with Lyle Rubin, the Bang Bang Podcast, a show about war movies with an anti-imperialist twist. That show, we've been doing an Andor miniseries, the Star Wars series, and it's going to be 8 episodes in total. We've dropped 3 of them already. We've got great guests on each of these 8 episodes. If you're into movies at all, I've pitched the Bang Bang Show before. I share some of the episodes that we do on the Undiplomatic feed. But this Andor's miniseries is really special. I mean, we talk about the Algerian Revolution, the sort of failings of the war on terror and how that's present in the show Andor, the way that like the George Floyd uprisings in 2020 have put their fingerprints on this show, themes of like labor exploitation. Harry Braverman's Labor and Monopoly Capital comes up, right? We talk about the prison industrial complex, debates about liberatory violence. Every episode we've done that's a topic, how people get radicalized because that process is on display in the first season of Andor, right? The vulnerabilities of empire, which is basically the basis of like Andor taking us into Rogue One, which takes us into the original Star Wars trilogy. So there's a lot there that's both like entertaining and like educating for real, like a real political education by way of this show because of the stuff that we bring in to the conversation. So if you're into that, definitely check it out. The website is bangbangpod.com. So that's the news before the news. Now for the news. The big thing right now, and the reason why I felt I needed to jump on the mic, even though like my time is precious, is that we have a fucking crisis over Kashmir, right? Between India and Pakistan. We're one step away from limited war and a nuclear crisis. So on April 22nd, a terrorist group killed 25 Hindu tourists in a local Kashmiri near a town called Pahalgam, which is a gorgeous resort town, like beautiful naturescapes and stuff. India claims that Pakistan was sponsoring the group that conducted the attack. India retaliated yesterday, 2 days ago, by attacking Pakistani territory, which it did also in 2019, but this attack was bigger, right? It's an escalation. And India says that it's only targeted 9 sites in Pakistan, very tailored or whatever, very precision strike, and that these sites were quote unquote terrorist infrastructure. That's India's words, right? But one of those sites was a mosque, which is obviously pretty egregious. India is not sharing any proof of Pakistani involvement, right? It's not sharing any proof that the sites that it attacked were terrorist camps or whatever. And Pakistan denies that it had anything to do with this, right? So, and on top of all of this, India is not allowing any kind of international investigation so far. So, like, all of that is very problematic. Like, the kids would say it's sus, right? Pakistan said that at least so far, 31 of its civilians have been killed, 46 have been wounded. Pakistan has promised to retaliate in like pretty, blood-soaked strong language. And they've already said that they've shot down 5 Indian aircrafts and several drones. And there's disputes about whether that's true. But nobody knows if that's the totality of the Pakistani response. Is that what they meant by retaliation? Is that the first salvo? We don't fucking know yet, right? Hopefully it is. The question is, why is this happening? And it depends how deep you want to go with establishing causality, because the initial terrorist attack was a response to India's extraterritorial aggression, its unilateral control of Kashmir, right? This is not Indian territory. India claims it as territory. That's revanchism, right? And in the root cause progressive foreign policy sense, India caused this attack on itself. This is the tragedy of thinking like a military bro. You cause attacks on yourself and you don't even realize it. You don't acknowledge it. That's you like experience the world as tragic and full of black swans without any sense that like you have brought this on yourself, right? That's where we're at. Narendra Modi, Hindu fascist, right? He caused this because in 2019, he unilaterally revoked Kashmir's autonomous status. India moved in, seized military occupied larger portions of Kashmir. And as part of that, it has denied local Kashmiris not just self-determination, which is an ongoing denial, but also just basic civil liberties. And this is why there is Kashmiri separatist terrorist groups in existence, right? So this was an aggressive move. India has shown more aggression toward Kashmir the last 6 years than China has shown toward Hong Kong, to put this in perspective, right? And so if you know the situation, you know Indian ethno-nationalism led to Modi basically turning India into a revisionist power here. Hindu fascism in India. The problem is like, it's not that Pakistan's a good guy here. They do state sponsor terrorism. Pakistan right now, it's not a military junta, but the military has more influence over Pakistani government decision making than almost at any point in my lifetime. So this is kind of like super problematic. And both sides are taking this tone rhetorically of like they seek to reestablish deterrence. And that's why they do what they do. They launch attacks and counterattacks in the name of reestablishing deterrence. I was a deterrence scholar before I was a critic. Reestablishing deterrence is not a thing. That doesn't have conceptual mooring. That it's a logic that is illogical. And so both countries right now, so far, they're issuing statements that they don't want to go further. They both have everything to lose from a war. Like they both have pretty precarious economies right now. Pakistan is like in a pretty desperate situation. India, in a strategic sense, it cannot afford to have a two-front conflict with like Pakistan and China at the same time. And anything you do toward Pakistan is a diversion away from their fetish, the strategic community's fetish with like China. India doesn't need to be in a conflict with China either, but it is what it is, right? Like in the strategy brain, you can't have a two-front conflict, right? So that's a problem. But the larger problem here is that they're both trapped in a conflict spiral, right? But the Pakistan and India, like the logic that leads India and Pakistan to retaliate against each other is a logic that does not allow for either to basically back down. Now, they could embrace a different logic. They could come to their senses. It was stupid of India to launch this attack on Pakistani soil in the first place. You know, Pakistan's immediate retaliation is proof that India's attack did not reestablish deterrence. Why? Because violence is the surest way to destabilize deterrence, right? When you attack someone, you're inviting an attack on yourself. And so the risk of nuclear escalation here is not trivial. It's useful to sort of bring in the not just the historical context, but the last big nuclear crisis they had, right? The Kargil War in 1999. Thousands died, nuclear alerts, nuclear threats being bandied about. It was real shit. And like, I know people who were involved in the Kargil War. like former US officials and stuff. Shit got way closer to a nuclear war than the public realizes, And at that time, we had some things on our side that favored stability, right? America was the global hegemon. It intervened in a kind of productive, stabilizing way, had personal relationships that it could use. That's just not where things are now, right? The US doesn't have the clout. We don't have the competence. We don't have the good offices. And it's going to be basically up to Pakistan and India either resolve this shit themselves or it's going to be other third parties that aren't the US, like France or China or something. Like, otherwise, this shit just doesn't get managed at all. And there is no stability to be had in situations that are defined in terms of mutual fear. Deterrence is not the foundation for stability. It's the opposite. And strategic studies scholars have really fucked up in making us think otherwise, right? So I guess the other thing to add, post-unipolarity, right? Like, we're past the era of American dominance. That's a good thing. And we're in a multipolar world. And that's not necessarily a good thing. There is positive potential in a system where global power is distributed across multiple sites, multiple nodes, multiple hubs. But I've said this before, I've written this before. Ethno-nationalist multipolar order produces precisely this kind of conflict, right? An ethno-nationalist social order that exists within a multipolar distribution of power is fucked, right? Ethno-nationalism is racial chauvinism. It doesn't just heighten conflict, it's premised on conflict. Ethno-nationalism brings us wars more and more. And in this case, that's what's going on. And it could mean nuclear war, which would be the disaster of disasters. Ethno-nationalism is exclusionary identity that's constructed out of ethnic and historical grievances. That only ends one way, and it ain't good. It ain't peaceful, okay? So this is the world that's emerging. This is the multipolarity that's emerging. And it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of willpower by a lot of us to make this multipolar world something better than it is, something better than what's coming, which means we got to somehow defeat the nationalist international, fascist international, global MAGA, whatever you want to call it, right? That's the task. That's the task. Next story. The Houthis, this rebel group fighting in the Red Sea, based in Yemen. As you know, I think we've talked about this on the podcast a few times. They've been going hard in the paint in the Red Sea in response to Israel's genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. They made their demands very clear. They're like, the genocide must stop, and the US must stop supporting Israel's war crimes, and then they will stop their attacks on commercial shipping. As part of the Houthis attacking commercial shipping in the Red Sea, they've also attacked the US Navy. The US Navy is there in the Red Sea to bolster US support for Israeli war crimes, Israel's assault on Palestinians. The root cause, just like in the Kashmir situation, the root cause way of thinking about this could not be more obvious. The US stops supporting Israeli war crimes, and the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea stop. The Houthi attacks on the US Navy stop. The reason this is important is because the US is refusing to face that root cause reality. They're refusing to face refuckinality. They also recognize, the Trump administration recognizes what I've said before. There's a cost exchange ratio that is unfavorable to the US with the Houthis, because for every $6 million or whatever that we spend on missiles, Houthis spend like $20,000 on a drone that defeats those missiles, right? The cost exchange ratio is unbelievably unbalanced. So the longer the conflict goes on, the more it harms us by orders of magnitude than it harms the Houthis. So this is not sustainable. It's a losing war. It's a losing situation. And it's losing both because we literally can't win it, but also because the longer it goes on, the more it bleeds us dry. So the Trump administration rightly they have failed to see the situation clearly, but they rightly see this cost exchange ratio problem, right? And so they've tried to negotiate a truce with the Houthis. I think it was brokered by Oman, is what I read. But that's okay. That's something. But now look at the truce, the ceasefire that's been negotiated is only that the Houthis will not attack U.S. flagged ships. So it'll stop attacking the U.S. military, but it's going to keep attacking Israel, and it's probably going to keep attacking non-U.S. flagged ships in the Red Sea. So it's not clear that this is going to last because that's a weird, like nonsensical ceasefire. Continuing the war is even stupider. But like we're looking at a situation where the US has spent billions of dollars the past year and a half, right, on fighting the Houthis. It deployed an aircraft carrier. It lost 2 F-18 fighter aircraft, which just fucking like fell off the tarmac, right? The Signalgate idiot leaks was about planning these Houthi operations. We've ended up killing dozens of Yemeni civilians for no reason as part of this conflict with the Houthis. And the Houthis are going to keep doing what they're doing, just not necessarily targeting US ships. The US only got attacked in the first place because we were putting our force in there to support Israel. We have been destroying ourselves in order to facilitate war crimes in Gaza. The ceasefire does not fix that. It does not remedy that. And until it does, the situation is still kind of fucked. But ceasefire is a ceasefire. It's better than nothing, I guess. Next story. I'm calling it post-American Asia. I don't know if there's a better term for this, but the ASEAN +3 finance ministers summit met. And ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, it's the 10 countries in Southeast Asia. They have their regional organization. And a while back, I want to say like over 20 years ago now, they established a mechanism to reach out to Northeast Asia. It's the ASEAN +3. So China, Japan, and South Korea are Asia's 3 largest powers. ASEAN +3 basically unites Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia. And this is like part of a much larger architecture that I wrote about in the book Pacific Power Paradox. There's an Asian political and economic and financial architecture that is Asia centric and that excludes the US, and that the US is not a part of. ASEAN +3 is like one of those, it's part of that infrastructure, right? So they met and they issued a joint statement. It's like 5 pages long, which like for a joint statement is long, very long. They don't mention the US by name, but they explicitly say that they're taking a unified stance against quote unquote escalating trade protectionism, right, by outside powers. Gee, who could that be? And this again, this is inclusive of China, so China is part of this. But they also write that their common policy priority is to reinforce long-term resilience of the region to keep their growth prospects going. So what they're describing is reducing their exposure to US volatility, reducing their exposure to US attempts at coercion, and building resilience by, it's the equivalent of like South-South interdependence, except that some of these countries are not part of the global South, like it's the idea of like intra-regional self-reliance. There has been evidence of this sporadically for 20 years, but it's building more and it's happening faster. And the way I described this in Pacific Power Paradox was that like the region was moving on past America, and American officials don't want to believe it. And Asian diplomats are invested in downplaying how radical this shift is because they don't want to provoke a US response, right? So East Asian governments are very sort of subtle and muted about how they talk about what they're doing, but what they've been doing, and it's just accelerating now more because of Trump's tariff war shit. What they've been doing is constructing a political and economic order in East Asia that does not require the US at all, except sort of as a destination market for exports. But the exports and trade is only like one small part of this political order. Like, it's a lot of diplomatic mechanisms. It's its own bond market, currency swapping mechanisms, the trade agreements of which America is of course not a part. There's just like a very complex financial architecture that has emerged and blossomed, and that is going to be the basis for Asian growth in the future. And America has excluded itself from it. It's the alternative to the US, basically, increasingly. So this is post-American Asia. The lag, the thing that we'll see last, the last gasp of America's relevance to Asia is its military bases in South Korea and Japan and sort of the Philippines, right? When those things will be the last to go because they're sticky. They're there for reasons that are security logic, not directly economic logic, right? And it's a dramatic decision to remove bases or to kick out bases or whatever. And so for the allies like South Korea and Japan, it's kind of like in the path of least resistance is keep the bases in place, keep America's military presence and its security alliance in place, and try not to jeopardize that. But you're not going to sacrifice yourself or your economy for the sake of those things, particularly in an era when Trump is like exploiting you and extorting you and threatening to remove these bases. So we're not very far from a scenario where America's military presence in Northeast Asia disappears. When it happens, it's going to happen abruptly, I think, instead of gradually. It could be happening gradually, but it's not. It's going to happen abruptly, partially because people don't want to face the reality. So I'm not even saying this is what I want. This is what's happening. And it's part of the larger reconfiguration of Asia, of East Asia. It's post-American. It's America is like welcome in East Asia. It's valuable in many ways, but that value is not infinite. It is not more than Asia itself. Asia itself saves itself. We used to worry when China would say like Asia for Asians. How could Asia not be for Asians? You know what I mean? Like, the question is whether it's going to be exclusive of the US or not. And that's up to American choices. And America has been only making bad choices because it lives in an illusion. US foreign policy elites who deal with Asia, US Asia hands, live in an illusion. They don't see what's coming. And this latest joint statement is an example of what's been coming. It's another example. It's the latest example. But this shit's been happening. I wrote Pacific Power Paradox in January 2023. This is the direction of things, man. This is the direction of things. Next story. This is a short one. China claims to have developed something called the J-36, which they identify as a sixth generation fighter jet. The current generation of fighters in America, the most advanced, right? Like F-22, that's a fifth generation fighter jet. A sixth generation jet, one of its values is that it can go stealth. It can penetrate contested airspace in theory. It's so expensive that you don't necessarily want to risk that. But it's the best in class for what America has to offer as an air force, right? So China has now said it's got a sixth generation jet and that this jet can block US stealth bombers from up to 620 miles away. I've only seen this reported in one place. So I don't know what is true here, but what's clear is that this is the direction that the PLA is going. Like, China's military is moving in this direction. It's developing better ability to not simply counter US power projection, but to project power itself. This is a capability that can deny US power projection from Guam. This stops America's ability to escalate in a military conflict over Taiwan. I'm sharing this not because it's like, oh, aren't the Chinese scary? Like, no, come on. And I'm also not sharing this because I think that this means that like America needs to up its game. What I'm sharing this for is to signal that like there's a game here that we're playing that we can't win and we shouldn't be trying to win. That's the wrong way to think about this situation. Okay. The balance of forces and how this is structured is like geographically, this is all China's backyard. That doesn't mean anybody should concede it to China. Jingos is jingos and they ought to be resisted, right? But America is operating at a massive, massive, thousands of miles long disadvantage. That's not surmountable. That's not surmountable unless you want to go to a nuclear war. And you're going to go to nuclears, it's fucked. What's any of this for? Right? Everything's fucked then. So this 6th generation fighter stuff, this is going to be used by the US, military industrial complex to justify Northrop Grumman's fucking NGAD, next generation air dominance, quote unquote, which is the US boondoggle. Billions of dollars is being allocated under the broad line item of next generation air dominance, America's sixth generation aircraft project, right? This is arms racing to nowhere. For what? For what? This is coming at the expense of the ability for America to have an economic democracy. This is coming at the expense of the American welfare state. And who benefits from that? Fucking fascists benefit from that. Democrats do not benefit from that. Lovers of peace do not benefit from that. Workers are harmed because we divert so much of our social spending into debt-financed militarism, arms racing. We don't need World War III. Next generation air dominance is not going to happen, but it is going to steal a lot of money from American workers, and it might kill us all, ultimately. We ought to be giving China reasons to not accelerate investments in the PLA. But as long as we're arms racing, they're arms racing too. So this shit's just going to keep happening. So the J-36, very wrong direction, if you ask me. I would tell that to fucking China's face, although I don't talk to the Chinese government. But if I did, I'd say fucking cut it out. And if any Americans are listening that are part of the U.S. government, fucking cut it out. Fuck Lockheed Martin. Fuck Northrop Grumman. Fuck the military industrial complex. Or we're all fucked. There's a couple like quick hits. And maybe I should have started off with quick hits. There's this fascinating chart that I want to show you guys. This is the first time that I've seen visualized the federal budget under Trump. And we all know, like through Doge, they've been gutting the administrative state. They've been gutting social welfare. They've been gutting anything that would sort of move us in the direction of equality, however modestly. And we know that they've been spending like fucking gangbusters on the military, on private contractors, on fucking ICE. And so like none of that, like we've been getting news of that kind of shit every day. But just look at how dramatic this is. This is wild, dude. This is what a fascist budget looks like. It is the total evisceration of everything. Weirdly, including American soft power. Like the State Department is getting fucking cucked more than anybody else, which is fucking ironic, Power is power. So like the self-destruction of soft power is fascinating because it's an own goal only from the perspective of like the state or from the perspective of like traditional national security, right? Gutting American soft power is not an own goal from the MAGA perspective because soft power is it's a lib tool for lib ends, going after the technocratic class necessarily because they comprise the middle class, which means gutting American diplomats, just like they gutted USAID and all of these regulatory functions that government serves, which is why all these budgets are being slashed. And then the only stuff where spend is up is the ethno-nationalist, militarist, jingoistic bullshit. Could they do it slightly more intelligently and maybe like harness the State Department instead of hollow it out? Yeah. They could do it more intelligently, but are fascists intelligent? Like, it seems not. Their brains are fucking broken. So this is what we get. Like, we shouldn't be surprised. And then very quickly, I wanted to share this absolutely insane clip from Stephen Miller. So he's the White House's, like, I forget his title, deputy chief of staff or chief policy advisor or something. He's Trump's right-hand man. He's like the Rasputin for Trump, right? And he's seen as having like special dark powers within the administration. And there's rumors that he's going to be the national security advisor, which is currently Marco Rubio is dual-hatted as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. There's rumors that it's going to be Stephen Miller, and this guy is fucking bad news. He's like avowedly fascist. He's a white supremacist, right? So check this little clip out. It's kind of funny. That's why I'm sharing this. This is Stephen Miller in college, and he went to college in Southern California, mind you.
Am I the only one who is sick and tired of being told to pick up my trash? And we have plenty of janitors who are paid that.
He's been nurturing grievances his whole life. He's a privileged white dude fuckhead. One superficial, hilarious way to read this is like, you need to teach your kids to pick up their trash or they're going to become fash, right? There's the deeper thing here, though, is that like this kid, I mean, I'm sure he got beat up in high school. Look at him. But like he was aching to have grievances. His mind is wired in a way where he feels privileged. You can't just be a decent custodian of yourself and the earth. You want to make sure that the janitors are picking up after you and you can't fucking do it yourself. This, at the most basic level, this is a bad person. A bad person. And I'm sure there are some good people who become fascists, but he is not one of them, okay? So this is fucking nuts. That could be the next national security advisor. You heard it here first, okay? And then finally, I just got word of this. The Stockholm, the Swedish city, right? The US government sent a letter to the city of Stockholm telling them to end their diversity, inclusivity, and equality programs within the next 10 days. No Swedish company will be able to do business with the US embassy if they don't sign something that disavows DEI, basically. The Swedish, like the city planning officer or whatever, gave a statement where they were like, this is weird. And we're definitely not going to comply with it, which is like good for them. And it is fucking weird. But what it really is, and like, it is a misreading of US leverage. Like, America doesn't have the leverage to dictate to other countries how they're going to govern themselves, which is pretty, in itself, the attempt to do this is ironic. It's a contradiction. If you want a world of nationalist blocs, which is explicitly what MAGA wants, explicitly, you cannot tell other nations what to be doing in their domestic affairs. This is fucking insane on many levels, on its own terms. It's insane. The thing that's notable, though, is that we're in a situation where the Trump administration is trying to export MAGA. They're trying to police the words that others use. They're trying to resegregate and increase the inequality, even the symbolic inequality, in other countries. They're waging the war on woke, and they're trying to export it even to a place like fucking Stockholm. And there's reports I saw associated with this that like US embassies around the world have been making these kinds of requests. Usually it's been targeted at specific like contractors or specific companies. This is the first time that the US government has sent a letter to a government, like an actual government office. So this is a new escalation. But if you think DEI is like a Marxist plot to take over the world, and you think you think equality is evil, and you've like decided that, of course you're going to fucking export it. Of course you're not going to just like keep that to yourself, So like their John Birch Society crazy mind shit, it doesn't just poison American life. It inevitably poisons the rest of the world too. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We got some good stuff coming in the pipeline very soon. I hope you like and subscribe to us on YouTube or, Spotify or wherever the hell you're getting this. Appreciate the love. Peace.